Ich komme aus Belgrad. Ich habe in Jugoslawien gewachsen und dort auch zur Schule gegangen. Und in Block 23, das ist in die Architektur, modernistische Architekturbuch vertreten als die wunderschönes Beispiel von modernistischer Architektur. Also New Belgrade, Novi Beograd, das ist meine Heimatstadt sozusagen. Und in einer Familie, die war sozusagen typisch für diese Zeit. Meine Mutter hat angefangen zu arbeiten, als ich schon ungefähr 10 Jahre alt war. Mein Vater war Militärpilot und meine Mutter hat in die bekannteste jugoslawischen Frauenmodefirma gearbeitet. Und mein jüngerer Bruder wurde später Kickboxing-Champion, 5 Jahre Champion von Balkans. Habe ich ihn auch manchmal auf die Weltkampfkämpfe gefolgt, also mit ihm manchmal hingegangen. Ich habe mich entschieden, Kunst zu studieren und habe ich auf der University of Arts, Universität der Künste in Belgrad, 5 Jahre Skulptur studiert und noch 3 Jahre danach die Masterstudien. Insgesamt 8 Jahre. Dann, ich war die sozusagen okay, maybe I should switch to English. I was the best graduated student, the student of honor, and then I moved abroad. So I went to France for a year. I got a scholarship from the city of Nantes in the Loire-Atlantique, the west coast of France. And for a year, and in that time, Belgrade was bombed. I decided initially to stay with some friends around. My student visa still didn't expire. And after I returned back to Belgrade, then it was actually, everything was kind of changed. Both my perspective changed drastically and the condition there as well. So I decided to move back to France. I was staying in Paris a bit, and then I moved to Slovenia. I worked with Dragan Živadinov and Peter Grinove, so National Theatre in Ljubljana. That was the only way for me to obtain my residency permit, my visa, and to earn for living. After 1.5 years in Slovenia, I moved back to Belgrade shortly. And then I started a project entitled Looking for a Husband with the EU Passport. And I had over 500 applicants from around the world, including one German man. And that brought me to Germany. In a way, this is a little too short story in a way, because in the 90s, at the time when I was studying in Belgrade, there was a war in Yugoslavia, and a particularly war in Bosnia and war in Croatia, that influenced a lot my understanding of political reality and also my period of studies. We also lived under embargo at that time, also cultural embargo. And yeah, I spent a lot of time in the Museum of Cinematography that had amazing collection, and I was active in demonstrations and street protests, and our reality changed completely from the Yugoslav socialism into transition and from this idea of internationalism towards nationalism. And this was, of course, terrible. In the 90s, even we lived really wealthy in the 80s, and Yugoslavia was open, and we could travel and everything. In the 90s, situation changed drastically, and there was extreme economical decline on the top of all ethical and spiritual declines. So for me, the life in France was quite something new to get used to, that you could just enjoy life in a way. To return to Belgrade, I think it was pretty rough time, because after bombing, I think everyone, like many people had this feeling like there's been such a big injustice happening to this country and to these people, and because there was a lot of, I belonged to the scene that was against government that was quite active, So this kind of scene was disappointed of being bombed, and then there was incredible infrastructure destructions, and also the main companies were also bombed down, and the hospitals and so on. So people also felt like, oh, they experienced something like almost if they were spiritually higher than someone like me who didn't experience it directly. So that was also a bit strange. Anyhow, I felt that because the art scene, I've been internationally active artist already since '96 or so. We talk about year 99. This was for me a signal that I have to go back anywhere I could, because the scene was anyhow extremely small, and the chances to work there were extremely small and limited. And in the early 90s and mid-90s, when I was still there, the entire scene was underground, and then suddenly also some positions came to the power, and then it didn't work so well in a way. So my feeling was I have to go out of this place. There were giant migrations all along the 90s. I've done some years ago a project called Lexicon of Tanja Ostojic, in which I interviewed and collaborated with over 33 women that all have the same family name and first name like me, and that come from different former Yugoslavian republics, or nowadays different countries. They have different generations, different nationalities. And so through those interviews, I also got to know about migration in a kind of sociological way. And there was a lot of migrations at the beginning of 90s. So most of Tanja Ostojic that live nowadays in Serbia were born in Montenegro, Croatia and Bosnia, while the ones that were born in Serbia live abroad. I've been working as a cultural activist. I realized that's more, it brings more to work as a cultural activist than as just a simple activist in my case, because through my art practice I have multiple possibilities to speak publicly. One would be via the work directly, that is not isolated to the art spaces, because I work also and speak in the educational institutions. I speak also at the activist conferences, at feminist conferences, and I also have an access in media, giving interviews, and that also does influence the change of the discourse and influences a lot a theoretical discourse. I experienced over decades that many theoreticians who started writing on migration, they picked my work and they didn't pick like some ordinary person crossing the border. That's of course, I'm very pleased about that, because I believe that this tactical media principle of like interlacing art, theory and activism is the way to gain, you know, to get further. Exactly, and to also at some point influence the policies and hopefully political change. I started to work with the issues of migration in the year 2000, so it's been 21 years ago. And I started researching different mechanisms that migrants have been forced to apply in order to transpass the borders. One of them was non-registered border crossing. I crossed non-registered border between Slovenia and Austria. At the time when I lived in Slovenia, I couldn't get the visa. I was refused visa, so I decided to go through the border, non-registered border crossing. Then I did queuing for visa, like spending 6 hours in regular queue in front of embassy, documenting that, even it wasn't allowed. And then being too late to get in. That was Austrian embassy in Belgrade. And then this project, looking for a husband with the EU passport that I mentioned. I shaved myself, body and head, and I posed naked for this advertising that was distributed online and also in some magazines, like art magazines, church magazines, at the time, so 21 years ago. And then this project took 5 years, including my moving to Germany and marriage and divorce. I decided to go a step further in the project and really accept this invitation to marry, and then look from the other perspective, to go deeper in this research and see what it means to be in such a constellation, and to continue talking from the artistic perspective about that. And then this project turned into the so-called integration project. Before the term integration got used in the political vocabulary, I used it in my projects, and I had also organized so-called integration language courses before they were here obligatory. I went always intuitively in this, made decisions intuitively, to be honest, the position is extremely fragile, I have to say. My position was always very fragile. But I did embrace it as it was, and trying to speak from that perspective, and also to encourage others to speak from their perspective. If you look at all these three, let's say, perspective of a woman in the context of migration is quite a fragile thing, and immigrant woman artist, it is, especially the art system is quite power structured. Power structure within the art system is quite dominant. In Germany as well, it is extremely difficult to penetrate the art system, especially if you're an artist who is not having a gallery, because the galleries are basically having extremely much space in the institutions, and you know, access to to the foundations that are purchasing artworks, access to institutions that are exhibiting artists. And then it is not easy to continue doing this, but somehow, because I work in really different fields, as I said, research, education, and art, some of my work with the time became respected and recognized, so I could keep working on new projects without funding. Except when I work on a very complex project, for example, like Lexicon of Tanja Ostojic, when I involve other people and they have to be paid, and their travels and everything have to be paid. And then I was lucky also to get some institutional support. The main principle of my work with other people is ethical attitude and respect of ethical principles of exchange. And I think this is extremely important when you work with people, especially if you are kind of using other people's perspectives in artistic context. Often these are really not refugees, but these are people like me that are, you know, artists or something, and then they have this as a background. And I think to speak about this issue, it's also important not to look just at this last migration context, because it's been there since ever. Last summer, for example, I didn't travel anywhere because of the obvious reasons, and I was swimming in so many lakes in Berlin and in Havel River. So in these terms, I really appreciate this, all those waters here. And I walk a lot, and I bike. That's my way to go through the city. There is a lot happening in the cultural life. That's a good side of Berlin. Sometimes difficult to follow everything. But it is a particular city. It is different than others. A bit colder, also in the social terms, and than some others. I wonder how it's going to develop. I think this 6 months lockdown right now, it's completely devastating towards the culture and towards the cultural workers and towards small businesses. I am seeing more and more local businesses closing down. The spaces are empty, and this is, of course, quite makes me worrying. But I have to say, there are apparently certain positions of power that don't care, and that they're pushing their agenda over decades here. You know, I think partly the same as they were in Nazi time, elite of the country. Somehow they seem to be still around with their ideology in certain terms. You know, looking at the Prussian history, and this is quite demotivating, so to say, because Berlin has incredible potentials to develop in a very democratic and international way. Because I'm quite a fan of the city citizenship, that is not a national citizenship, and it speaks for the logic of the big cities like Berlin, that has a very good I think, structure of the population, and that could create a much better society in this term. I have one campaign called 30% reduction for those who identify as women on all products and services, including border crossing services. And this I basically print at the bottom of each of my invoice. If I sell my book or a poster, this is the reduction that I'm giving to a female, or to ones who identify as female, basically. And a few years ago I met somebody from a feminist party who decided they will try to push this on the governmental level. And I mean, I think only 2 years ago that Germany put this in the law, that you're not allowed to pay somebody 30% less, right? And as a woman. But this is not yet the case in the practice. I'm extremely surprised. That was probably one of my first cultural shocks in Germany. How much women were not equal in front of the law, first of all. And that we still, in 2020, 21, have like 80% of professorships, like full-time employments or permanent employments in German academia are men. Still 80%. So this is quite annoying. I think this is the Western German tradition. I don't think this was the GDR tradition. I think that the GDR had to transit in every sense into the Western German principles of everything, and then that's of course highly problematic. Also, it's interesting for me at least to look at how those generations and generations of migrants from the 70s or 80s got a limited access to society, especially in the terms of economics and education. In Austria, this is also the case. I believe that this is quite important topic to look at if we look at the migration, because I don't think that Germany offers, for example, a possibility for people to start bigger businesses. If you don't have a possibility to inherit something from your family, then you cannot start a big business. And if you have migration background, you're quite likely not to get a chance to study, not to get a chance to, you know, have your own company and so on. This is something to be looked at and to be really worked on, I believe. You cannot heal the nation if you do not, you know, change those issues. If the land and the wealth is distributed in a more ethical way, and if the people who committed certain crimes, you know, or if they earned their wealth in inhuman way, do not return this wealth to the society, it cannot change. Those structures are unfortunately being reproduced over and over through generations. I got German citizenship I think less than 2 years ago, and it was such a struggle to get it, and it was terrible, it was humiliating and so on, and I had to give up the citizenship, both for me and my son, Serbian citizenship, and then we were stateless for a week or so, and then become German, what was very weird for me. And also being Serbian is completely weird for me because I was born Yugoslavian, right?